guys, it's Caitlin V and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would go through the past 2 months in books and let you know what I read, all of my ratings for them, and let's see how well I stuck to my TBR. Spoiler, not great. The last time I did this was in January, so I thought I would do another one. Normally I would do these, like I plan to do these at the end of every single month, but I've just been in the worst reading slump ever. And I mentioned this on TikTok that I was in the worst slump, and so many of you were like, holy shit, are we all in a slump? Apparently the March was like the worst for everybody, so if you're in a slump, I'm in a slump, we're in this together. We're all in this together. Unfortunately. But cheers to us and getting out of our reading slumps. I'm already out of it. I'm telling you, my April reads are gonna be fire. Starting off with my February reads, the first book that I read was A Court of Thorns and Roses. Can you believe it? She has entered her fantasy era. Not really, but we're just dipping our toes in. But if you know, you know, this is like one of the most popular intro to fantasy series I feel like out there right now. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody who's in the fantasy realm has been trying to get me to read this series for so long. So this is the first book, and I would honestly rate this like a 7.5 out of 10. As with most series, I feel like the first book's obviously always gonna be kind of an introduction, just getting you familiar with the world, with the characters. You're not really getting into like the meat, the bones, the juice of the story. It's just gonna hopefully get better and better. So I knew that going into it that this wasn't gonna be like the best book by any means, but I feel like once I continue this series, once I finish it, my rating for the series as a whole might change. I won't go into this too much because I did film a reading vlog for this. I just have to edit that. So stay tuned for that. I'm already on the second book and I am filming a reading vlog for that one as well. Next up, I read The Inmate by Freida McFadden on my Kindle, and I'm obsessed with her books. They're just the perfect way for me to get out of a slump, and especially if I finish like a really long book or something that was so draining it took me like 3 weeks to finish, then I always just find myself gravitating towards a Freida book because they're just really short thrillers. I mean, they're not like super short, but the chapters are really short, so it's just so hard to put down, and the stories are always just so fascinating to me, and I just like have to know what happens next. I'm always trying to guess the twist, and I can never ever freaking guess the twist. Like I always think I have it, and then she gets me every time, and I love every minute of it. And The Inmate is no exception. She gets a job as a nurse practitioner at the maximum security men's prison, and when she gets the job, she quickly realizes that her ex-boyfriend from high school is an inmate there. And not just that, she's actually the one who got him in prison in the first place. As she spends more time with him, she starts to question, does he really deserve to be here? Did I make a huge mistake? You guys, if you've read any of her books, I mean, you'll just know they just take you on such a ride, and you just think you know what's gonna happen. I thought it was gonna be pretty obvious, and with this one I was like, okay, maybe they're not as twisty as some of the other ones I've read, but I knew nothing. I think I knew like one of the twists in this, but there's always a couple at the end. I loved it. Definitely check it out if you have a Kindle. These are on Kindle Unlimited. I'm trying really hard not to just like binge them all because I need them as like a palate cleanse. Gotta span out the fun. Oh, I forgot my rating. I would give this book like a 9 out of 10. And let me just say, I feel like my thriller ratings are a little bit different than, I don't know, ratings for like romance books. I rated a 9 out of 10, and it doesn't mean it's gonna be a 5-star book that I'm gonna be thinking about constantly and being like, oh my god, this is a life-changing book. But it does entertain me in a way that I can't put it down. I love the short chapters. I just like binge it in one sitting, and I'm just enjoying the entire ride. So for that, it gets a really high rating from me. So take that as you will. The third book I read was actually for my book club, and this was Darling Venom by Parker S. Huntington. I have no shame in rating this 11 out of 10, you guys. I'm so obsessed with this book. Now, this book for me was on the level of altering my brain chemistry. Like, I'm not even kidding you guys. This is up there with like Say You Swear for me, which is I've been chasing that high for so long. A book that would make me feel as much as I did like Bright Side and Say You Swear. This was it. And what's so funny to me is that this book was actually so split in my book club. I was holding my ground, okay? I was defending this with my life, and I will continue to do so. I have no shame, which by the way, I will link my book club down below if you want to join us at any time. The top 2 tiers get instant access to our Geneva group chat, so definitely recommend. We're unhinged, it's fine. I highly recommend going to this blindly because that's what I did. I had no idea what this was about. I was like, okay, this is gonna be a love story. I think I saw it was like enemies to lovers, but that's pretty much all I knew. And when I went into it, it starts off really dark. So I do recommend looking up content warnings because this could be definitely triggering to some people. It starts off where I'm like, oh my god, this is dark, and then it gets really dark, and then at the 11% mark, I remember I don't know if I cried, but I was getting really emotional. I was just so shook, and I was like, how is there 90% of the book left? Then you get into the meat of the story, and I just feel like, ugh. Let's just say she meets his brother and it goes from there. Oh my god, you guys. I don't want to give anything away, so just trust me on this. There were elements of this that reminded me of November 9th from Colleen Hoover, but if it was way darker. But this just made me feel so many things that I had to buy the physical copy of this and actually start highlighting things. And this is on Kindle Unlimited, so definitely give that a go, especially if you're like, am I gonna like this, am I not? My only critiques is it is very long. And there is one chapter in this that did not sit well with me or anyone in my book club. It's the gyno scene. If you know, you know. I wish that was not in the book. And again, you know the drill because this was such a long book. I think this took me like 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to finish. Then I had to finish the month with another Freida McFadden book. This actually came out in February, at the end of February, I think. So it was perfect timing. I finished this book and I was like, I am about to devour the sequel. Okay, this is a sequel to The Housemaid, which was actually the first Freida McFadden book that I read last year. And I'm always recommending that book. I think it's such a great way to get into thrillers. So I definitely recommend reading that one first because there is gonna be some confusion with the sequel, obviously. But I rated the sequel again a 9 out of 10. I think I liked the first one more, even though I did pick up on the twist in that one, like the big twist, pretty early on because it was the same twist as The Last Mrs. Mrs. Parrish. But if I hadn't read that book then, I think I would have been way more shook. So I don't want to give anything away from like the first book that would spoil the second book, but all I'll say is it takes place a couple years after the first book ends. So we get more high profile nanny drama. We love unreliable characters. Everybody's suspicious. It's so good. So those are all the books I read in February, and now moving on to my March reads, which again, I was in the absolute worst slump of my life. And I have to blame the first book for this, even though I feel like I was kind of in a reading slump in February as well, just because I was reading like so many. I think here's my issue. Past 2 months, I've been reading like 4 books at the same time. Like I was reading these 2 and The Inmate all simultaneously. I was just kind of like bopping between the 3 of them. And then in March, you think I would have learned my lesson, but I was reading 4 books at the same time. Yeah, not my best move. Didn't even finish them all, which is great for me. But I honestly have to blame the first book, which is actually our March book of the month pick, which is so sad because so many of us voted for this book. We were so excited to read this. But that book is Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score. It's the sequel to one of my all-time favorite books, Things We Never Got Over. It pains me to say this, but this one I would only give like a 6. The more I think about it, the less I want to rate it. At first I gave it like a 6.5, maybe 7 out of 10. But the more I think about it, I feel like I want to rate it like a 6 or even less. I don't know. Here's the thing. I really liked the first book, but I know a lot of people didn't like it because it was so freaking long. And I kind of like, for some reason with the first book, I didn't realize how long it was. I was personally so invested in the story because I like how she just jumps right away into the story. So interested in the characters. Like I love the female main character in that one. Naomi is one of my favorites. I just think she's an amazing person. And I just never read a story like that. And I honestly kind of forgot how it ended because I read it so long ago. So when I picked up the second book, I was like, oh, I'll immediately remember all the things that happened in the first book. Well, no, I did not. So this book follows Nash, who is the brother of the male main character in the first book, Knoxville and Nashville. Honestly, was just not into Nash in the first book. Like nothing about him really appealed to me, even though he was supposed to be like the nice guy. I like the grumpy, broody men in my books. It just did not hit for me. It was so slow. This one was also so freaking long. This took me 3 weeks to read this book, which is too damn long, okay? Justice for romance books being like 350 pages or less. That's kind of my sweet spot. That's where I like to stay. Books can be long if they're interesting, if things are like actually happening to keep me, you know, wanting to read it. I just never wanted to pick it up, which is why I was reading 4 different books at the same time, because I was just like, I literally do not want to read this book. It was so boring to me. And it pains me to say that because I love Lucy Score's writing and I love the first one so much. And I really feel like I'm going to love the third book. And I 100% am going to be reading that in September. So for that, I'm not mad that I read this because I feel like you just have to read this book. I think it was necessary for me to read that. So hopefully it will be worth it for me. But if it's not, I'm going to be mad. But that's just my personal opinion. There are some people in my book club who actually liked it a lot better than the first book. So that just goes to show there's always a book for everybody. Just because one person doesn't like it doesn't mean you're not going to like it. So then in classic Caitlin fashion, you know I had to read a Freida McFadden book. I needed it. So I read Never Lie. And this was another 9 out of 10 for me. Are we shocked? This one was so good. And I definitely want to do like a bookish get ready with me on TikTok to this one because it slapped. It slapped. So this book follows newlyweds who are going to like a house showing that they set up with a realtor. And when they end up going there, there's a massive snowstorm. Of course, because of the isolation of this house and also the snowstorm, there's no cell service. The husband is so obsessed with this house. He's like, oh my God, I can just see us here. We're gonna have to stay here the night because of this storm. And she's like, absolutely not. This is so creepy. And also she's getting weird vibes because she's like, I feel like someone's in the house. There was a light on. She sees footprints. The husband obviously thinks she's insane. They realize the house used to be owned by this renowned therapist who actually disappeared. And not only that, but the wife ends up finding like a secret room with all of her tapes in there from her past patient sessions. And she starts to listen to them. And she starts to kind of put the pieces together of what might have happened to the psychiatrist leading up to her disappearance. It is so good. I know I say that all of the twists in her books like really get me good, but I feel like of all the Freida books that I've read, this one might be the most twisty and shook that I've ever been. And then I listened to the novella And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman. I wanted to get this from the library, but there was such a long wait list and it was such a short book. So I was like, let me just check Scribd. And I checked that and they actually had the ebook on there and the audiobook. But I'd heard such good things about this novella and I definitely recommend it if you like novellas or audiobooks. By far one of the best novellas I've read or listened to, whatever. For the most part, novellas don't really hit for me, especially compared to just a full-length novel. It's just so much shorter. They just miss all of like the angst, the slow burn. There's just so much less to the story, you know what I mean? And you don't really get invested in the characters. But this one I thought was done so well. It made me feel so much in such a short amount of time. And I think that's why everybody loves this novella. It's about a relationship between a grandson and his grandfather who is going through dementia, slowly starts losing his memory, and you kind of grow up with the grandson and also his dad as well, and just seeing how their relationship progresses and their stories. And it's about missing somebody who's still here. And it was just gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, heartwarming. Loved it so much. And actually the audiobook guy, the narrator did such a good job with this one. I highly recommend listening to it. So good. I don't really know how to rate novellas because they're just so different from like a full-length novel. So I'm not gonna rate it, but I'm just gonna say that I loved it. And the last book I read in March was Right Man, Right Time by Megan Quinn. This was an easy 9 out of 10 for me. Megan Quinn is one of my favorite authors. She just gets it. She gets it. She's the author of Not So Me Cute, and I love that series. I highly recommend if you want something that's like just a perfect rom-com. So a aside from A Not So Meet Cute, this one's definitely my top favorite Megan Quinn books of all time. But this one's about a girl named Ollie, and she just gets an assignment from her journalism internship, basically for her finals, so that she can get credit for her internship. She's normally in like the lifestyle beauty realm, and to her shock, she gets assigned to write about hockey. And she's like, who would do this to me? Like, I literally hate hockey. This is not even in my niche of what I write about. And of course she finds out it's like her nemesis who works there, and she just loves to sabotage her. She walks up to her nemesis. She's like, why would you do this to me? In the middle of telling her off, when her boyfriend, Ollie's ex-boyfriend, walks right up to her nemesis, starts making out in front of her, and she's like, come again? Doesn't realize they've been dating. She dated this guy for years, so obviously her heart sunk, but she's not gonna like let them know that. So Ollie just starts going on and on, being like, no, I have a boyfriend. He's actually here. We're so in love. We have the best sex ever. Like, we're obsessed with each other. And her nemesis very quickly is like, bullshit. So what does Ollie do? She runs to the end of the bar, sets her eyes on the first guy she sees, gets his consent, and they start making out. The mystery man ends up being Silas Taters, who's actually a professional hockey player. Everybody knows who he is. He's like famous in this town. Obviously Ollie didn't even know that. Worked out perfectly because they actually both want to use each other to make their exes jealous. So you know what that means. We get fake dating, baby. There's also an age gap. Ollie's in college. He's like 30, pro sports player. And you guys, the spice in this, it's so good. It's immaculate. It's immaculate. He has a piercing. I'm just thinking about the spice. Obsessed, obsessed. But if you're looking for a good spicy rom-com, I highly recommend this one. And also A Not So Meet Cute if you haven't read that one yet. These two books are so good. Those are all the books that I read the past 2 months. I definitely expected to read more over the past 2 months, but man, this reading slump was no joke. Like, for me to just not want to pick up the book, yeah, it's rough, but I have a very good feeling about April. I'm already loving the 2 books. I actually just finished 1 book and I'm loving the book that I started today. Reading vlogs are coming very soon, and I will be updating you on all my reads on my TikTok, so go follow me at Caitlin B. All my links will be down below, along with my reading guides, my book club. You can also follow me on Goodreads if you want to see what I'm reading in real time. But other than that, I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I will see you in my next video. Mwah!